We're going to turn to the Sunday papers now. Very happy to say in studio we have Cliona Foley. Great to see you again.
You too, Joe.
How you've been over the last couple of years.
Hanging in there like everybody else.
And Sarah O'Donovan with us as well, All-Ireland winning camogie player. Sarah, great to have you on.
Hi guys, how's it going?
Great. I'll start with the front pages just to give people a sense of what's out there, what's leading the way. We have a picture of Sadio Mane yesterday at Anfield, a 1-0 win for Liverpool. The headline in the Sunday Times here is "Over to You City," and also on the Sunday Times front page, Tuchel, he says Chelsea fans wrong to chant for Abramovich during the minute's applause for Ukraine. Sunday Independent, they have a picture of the hurling game last night. This was Galway against Cork, a win for Cork. Rebels rising is the headline. Cork maintain winning run to see off Tribesmen. And beneath that, in one of the great tell us something we don't knows, United can't afford any more mistakes, says Ralph Rangnick. He says they need to stop making mistakes in the transfer market over the next couple of years if they want to have any chance of catching Chelsea and Liverpool. The Mail on Sunday then, the main picture is of Cork and Galway last night. Revitalised Rebels scorch into league semi-finals. Cork won 26, Galway 23 points, so a 6-point win for Cork last night. Tragedy obviously for the Shefflin family, very much overshadowing that game, and our condolences to all concerned. Beneath that though, they have Thomas Tuchel, "Don't be dumb" is the headline. Thomas Tuchel blasts Chelsea fans over crass Abramovich chants is how the Mail present it. Sunday World with a different approach on their back page. Eric the Great. So they are saying that Eric Ten Hag is now emerging as the top target for the Manchester United hot seat. We have the Sun, celebrations there for Klopp giving City a run for their Mane, and beneath that, shame is the headline. Tuchel raps Blues fans here on the back page of the Sun. So the Abramovich chant mars applause for Ukraine is how the Sun presented. Sunday Mirror also going with that story, and it's a picture of Thomas Tuchel. "No respect" is the headline. Boss Tuchel blasts Chelsea fans as they chant Abramovich's name during Ukraine solidarity applause. And there is also an interview with Alexander Zinchenko, and I suspect he's not the only Ukrainian who feels this way and feels very conflicted and torn. He says, "Part of me feels like I should be there alongside my compatriots." So they are the back pages of the various papers. Cliona, it wasn't utterly shocking, but it was even a touch surprising that so many Chelsea fans decided to chant Roman Abramovich's name during a 60-second moment of recognition for what the Ukrainians are going through. They couldn't even observe that 60 seconds. I no doubt they would have chanted Abramovich's name across the course of the afternoon, but to do it during that 60, which they did, but that 60 seconds, that was quite something. Pathetic, really.
Yeah, but I suppose, this is the past week has interested, I think, anybody who has a passion for sport, in that we have seen the organising bodies of sport maybe finally get a conscience, or at least own up to having some conscience. But you always expect that of individual fans, because the word fan comes from fanatic. So, but I thought, the Sunday Times also has two pictures of I suppose what shows the double, quadruple, or multiple different standards that we apply in sport. When they have a photo of a banner that was flown over slagging off Kurt Zouma over the incident with the cruelty to the cats, and it has, the banner was over playing with Cats Lives Matter, and there was a huge mask of a cat in the grounds yesterday. So sometimes you just, you just have to laugh at I suppose, the different standards and the multiple contradictions of things. But this has been a week, I think, where, and the papers are full of it today, really looking at and the Abramovich one is really, that the, sort of the double standards that apply in sport in terms of who invests in it. Who do we give major competitions to? How well are they vetted? What are we prepared to look beyond? And so there's loads of that in the papers today. It's some interesting stuff.
You could argue really the short version, or the short answer to your question, is whoever has the money.
Because hasn't it always been thus? But there has. I think the Abramovich one is of particular interest because, and I've read some really good stuff in the past few days as well, and been thinking about it. It's because he was the one who has, if you like, created the opportunity for the petro clubs and for all of that huge investment. It was his success with Chelsea that has attracted the money from so many big billionaires into Premiership football. So there's a big argument about as he leaves Chelsea, what has he left behind? What's the legacy? The legacy is this huge us and them, which is evident. Even I was in Russia in 2006 for the World Indoor Championships. Derval O'Rourke won the gold medal, and I happened to be staying way out in Moscow. It's the only time I've ever been to Russia, out in the suburbs. And I went out. It was snowing very heavily, and I went out. There was a local market on, and they were people in their 80s selling the springs from pens to try to get some money in the little local market sitting in the snow. And then I got the chance during the weekend to pop down to see Red Square. And Red Square used to have this big official Russian estate shop there. I think it was called Gum, and it's now designer from one end to the other. And just the contrast between that when you're in a country like Russia, and then you think about how sport works, and giving Russia the World Cup and all those sort of things. It is shocking sometimes. Felt the same really, I think, in Rio, at the Olympics in Rio, when you, on your way to major stadiums, looked up and saw the favelas and saw the poverty, and also saw so much investment by the state. And we used to come home every night on the motorway back to where we were staying, and I remember the last night, on every single motorway bridge there was a tank and soldiers. And just to see that, the state investment in these big things, and the use of armies, for protection around sporting and sport organisations, to further the reputation of the country. It is very upsetting, and we're all complicit in it if we work in sport.
Tuchel's comments, just if you didn't catch them, by the way, he said of the Chelsea fans during that minute's applause, it was not the moment to do this, to sing Abramovich's name. If we show solidarity, we show solidarity, and we show it together. And there was a very hostile reaction in Turf Moor after that moment from the Burnley fans, and Tuchel said, we show respect as a club. We need our fans to commit to this minute of applause in the moment that we do it for Ukraine. There's no second opinion about the situation there, and they have our thoughts and our support, and we should stand together as a club. It was not the moment for other messages. It just speaks, Sarah, to an idiocy, frankly. That's all you can say.
And looking at Conor McGregor deciding that he might buy Chelsea speaks to further idiocy. This is the kind of conversations that we've been having this week, because there has been so many different entities buying into sport. There doesn't seem to be a framework for actual, a structure. You shouldn't be allowed to consider buying a club. That would be my first thought. Were either of you surprised that Conor McGregor was tweeting during the week that he might consider buying Chelsea?
I frankly, I laughed at the notion as well. But McGregor has, been in Putin's company before, just as former head of the Irish Olympic Committee. Pat Hickey has been as well. So, there's a circle of power there around sport that you just see all the time. The thing that also makes me say as well on that is that, like, there is a thing in British football about fitness to own a club and that, but I mean that I've never looked at that in any great detail. Have you, Joe? But I would be really interested to look at that when you look at some of the owners that have come into it.
Well, it certainly doesn't make any great
play. They have to rewrite it, aren't they? When
it comes to things like human rights or anything in that department. If anything, it's just more of a legal test, and it's more of a financial test. Yeah, I thought
I heard somewhere during the week that they're now going to add a human rights thing to it. You would have thought that should be in there before, as indeed you would think it should be in the International Olympic Charter as well.
Well, they're talking about it. Right. I remain sceptical.
Right.
For instance, I thought page 8 on the Sunday Times, Jonathan Northcroft, he had the quotes from Amanda Stavely during the week, where she was almost talking about poor Roman Abramovich, an innocent victim in all of this. So Stavely, of course, is part of the company that brought in the Saudi PIF to Newcastle, and she is with the company that have a 10% stake in the club Capital Partners. So she was saying, you're always going to have geopolitical issues. The world is never going to not have problems. I'm really sad today that someone's going to have a football club taken away because of a relationship that they have with someone. I don't think it's especially fair. And obviously the Saudis were much criticised when they arrived into Newcastle.
He gets a great quote in this, Joe, as well, because he quotes her, and it's just exactly what you hear all the time. He quotes her saying, "I'd rather everybody look and get excited about football than be involved in war." So if we can create great content, and that was the line that, you know, how often are we hearing that now, you know? And that's he finishes with that line, "There's great content to create, and wouldn't it be nice if everybody got excited about football rather than being involved in war." That's the line he finishes on. It's a very good piece, but that's the killer line, and that is the line that betrays so much truth about, you know, investment in sport and what people are now doing with sport.
Eamon Sweeney and David Walsh addressed this whole area on the respective back pages of the Mail on Sunday and the Sunday Independent. So Eamon Sweeney quotes the German broadcaster DW, who had a great headline. I hadn't seen this. And the headline was, "After legitimising Putin, sport criticises Russia," which is a brilliant summation of the last 20 plus years. Even as bombs rained down on Ukrainian civilians, FIFA and the International Paralympic Committee thought they could get away with allowing Russian teams to compete once they didn't do so under their national flag. That is a point worth making, because people outside of sport, I'm listening to them on various current affairs shows, are doffing their cap to FIFA. FIFA were railroaded into doing this by several football associations who refused to play Russia. So FIFA deserve next to no credit here. And Eamon Sweeney points out the history of Putin in sport, that Russia hosted the 2013 World Athletics Championships, the 2014 Winter Olympics, the 2018 World Cup. Asked last week if he regretted praising Putin so lavishly, Gianni Infantino waffled about sport bringing people together. And Eamon Sweeney makes a point which I think reflects badly on all of us, present company included, for not calling out this even more, although to a large extent I feel sports washing has been called out. But he points out the invasion of Ukraine may be shocking, but Russia's behaviour is hardly surprising. 2016-17, as teams fought to qualify for Putin's World Cup, Russian planes bombed the Syrian city of Aleppo, killing several thousand civilians. The Syrian war has seen around 160,000 civilians killed and created 6.5 million refugees. It is the great humanitarian disaster of our times, and largely the responsibility of Bashar al-Assad, backed by Russia, amongst others. And yeah, he talks about the fact that the World Cup happened and the Sochi Games happened, and people reported about what a great time they were having in Russia. Quite a few Russians are seeking cover in vague statements about peace, which studiously avoid blaming Putin or their own country. Such statements are meaningless. Akin to I want peace, he says, is akin to the Russian. It's the Russian equivalent of all lives matter. So look, the history of sport investing, of tyrants investing in sport is outlaid there, and we've known about it for a long time. It just seems, Sarah, kind of hopeless, because as much as it's mentioned, sports fans are never going to boycott these events, and sporting organisations are never going to turn down the money. So I've no doubt that in another 15, 20 years, similar issues will arise again, I would think.
That's why governments are so attracted to sport, is because the ordinary man is never going to leave his sport. And if they seem that they're involved and engaged and supporting these sports players, then the ordinary man will essentially row in. So it's not until something really drastic and horrendous and awful like this week in Ukraine comes, into our televisions and into our sitting rooms, that we can't deny that this is awful, and we have to stand up. But it has been a long time, as you say, it's been a long time coming. We have been studiously skirting around sports washing, and I know a number of weeks ago I was talking to you about Saudi Arabia and the golf and Shane Lowry, and I had a very difficult, I suppose, conversation with myself about where I stood with Shane supporting golf in Saudi Arabia, and here we are a number of weeks later, and something else has completely escalated.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Eamon Sweeney mentions about in 2016, 2017, when teams were trying to qualify for the World Cup. He talks about Russians bombing the Syrian city of Aleppo, and I know an Irish man married to a Ukrainian woman, and actually that's the text he sent me during the week. Was he said they're trying to do an Aleppo on Kiev. And he told me his 15-year-old godson back in Ukraine had gone to sign up for the army, which really brings it home to you. But in recent years, particularly, I've often said, and particularly televised sport, I mean, to paraphrase it, I do think it is the opium of the masses, because there's so much of it. We're so absorbed in it. Every single hour, everywhere you go, televised sport is on. And as it has grown, sometimes you think political awareness has shrunk, in direct opposition to it, and all of these things are used. But you go back to 36, you go back to the Berlin Olympics. I mean, it's a classic case of it, and this isn't new. It is just, I think, that the cost of hosting international sport and the way it's run now has grown so much. Also, the cost of running major sports teams has become so much that there's even less questions asked sometimes about who's involved. And I would say we can't wash our hands of it either. And I look at Sheikh Maktoum with the Irish Racing, somebody who has been up in court for the treatment of his daughters. You would ask questions there as well. So that is the situation. Is the cost of it is so much. David Walsh's line as well is, though, that individual people have to. He is kind of calling on individual athletes to speak out, and he's very critical of the fact that Medvedev hasn't yet.
Yeah, David Walsh, I mean, he echoes, it's a similar theme to Eamon Sweeney in part, because he talks about the way Russia has used sport in the midst of doing terrible things away from the sporting arena. So 4 years ago, we were in Russia for the World Cup. At the time, Russia had annexed Crimea, was embroiled in a terrible conflict in Syria. In Moscow, political opponents and journalists were murdered as the Kremlin saw fit. 3 months before that World Cup, 2 Russians came to England and attempted to assassinate Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia using the nerve agent Novichok. The government accused Russia of the crime. 153 diplomats expelled. Then the World Cup happened, and visitors to the country were impressed by the level of organisation and the hospitality of ordinary Russians. This is how sports washing works. And
we had it in Beijing, recently, and we'll have it in the World Cup this year, the Soccer World Cup again this year as well.
The Russian thing is very striking in that the West at large, beyond just sport, embraced Russian money. Moscow on Thames and just a general sense of globalisation was happening, and now overnight Putin has become utterly toxic. And so that one crept up on people a touch. Now, only a touch. Everybody knew it was effectively a dictatorship, and there was just a degree of hoping, I think, that things didn't ever escalate to the extent they have this week. So there's the Russian situation, but take Qatar and the World Cup. It's my sense, Sarah, that people are, one, incredibly aware of what's going on in Qatar. They find the whole thing abhorrent. They know about how the World Cup bidding process worked as well. They don't suspect that the rights of migrant workers has improved, and yet people feel powerless to improve that situation. It's just motoring on towards December. FIFA haven't really done much about it, in so much as anyone can see. And come the World Cup, we'll all probably watch the matches, but we'll all say as well what a disgrace it's been. And then it'll be January and it'll be behind us.
Where do we step in? And, everyone's lives are affected by making stances, and people are nearly tired and exhausted from putting up their hand and saying, I think this is wrong, and how do we stop this? So we just kind of get, from month to month, we just roll into the next event, and it, as you say, it's going to creep up on us, and all of a sudden we're going to say, God, that's ugly, and reading here about the migrants being underpaid, not being paid, the stadium is being pushed along, and it will be delivered, but at what cost? I don't know which one of us has the power to be able to stand up and make enough noise, and how much noise do we need? It seems overwhelming sometimes to say, how am I going to make an impact here? And I wonder, is that at a global level? People are exhausted from trying to make an impact.
I mean, I think some may boycott it, not enough to hurt the viewing figures. Ultimately, it's just so demoralising that FIFA don't care. FIFA should be the ones who are organising this tournament and who would say, well, we've seen the abuses highlighted, therefore we're going to make a stand. That's not going to happen. So where do you go? I mean, the people running the game should be ashamed of themselves in so many ways. On Medvedev, Cliona, I'm curious for your thoughts on this. So we've seen all the Russian teams effectively expelled from world competition. What do we do about the individuals competing? Like David Walsh makes the argument, for instance, that Medvedev hasn't really said very much about the situation. He says Rublev, who's 6th in the world, he said, no war please, down the lens of a TV camera. And he says that Putin would not have been amused. He says, in the same week, though, Medvedev played in Mexico, released a statement that talked about peace without mentioning the war in Ukraine. And he wore a red, blue and white T-shirt, which looked remarkably like a Russian team shirt at a time when his country's army was inside Ukraine. It didn't seem like a coincidence. And Walsh says, I wouldn't object to Rublev, who said what he said down the lens at Wimbledon. Medvedev, though, would not be welcome. I don't know, can we go down that route of judging, well, who took the strongest moral stance, who said enough to allow them into Wimbledon? I think it has to be an all or nothing rule.
Yeah.
And I don't know what instinctively.
That's why it's easier to do it in team sport, isn't it?
Team sport's easy because you're representing the team. You're representing the country, or you're representing the league. As individuals, you can't change where you were born. So, where are you on the likes of a Medvedev playing at Wimbledon?
I think it's up to Wimbledon to make that decision, and I can't see them banning any players. No, because we already know that international tennis, has a very unusual relationship with China. As we saw with that case this year already with Peng Shuai. So, it's up to everybody else. It's up to people to have a conscience. But money overrules conscience is the reality. I was interested. I was talking to one of the Irish rowers this week, Emer Lam, and I was asking her because she was the international rowing body has banned the Russians and the Ukrainians from competitions. So, and I said to her, where does that sit with you? And she said, well, I've thought about this a lot, and I think I feel sorry for their individual athletes, but then I turn on the television and I think what they're going to suffer is far less than the people in Ukraine. But I think that's the bottom line.
Yeah. Sarah, the argument against punishing individuals, I suppose, is that with team events, it is representative of the country in a very visceral way. And certainly for club teams, you could move club. You can't quite do that if you want to play for the Russian national team. So there is a logic to extending it to individuals as well. Where are you on extending it to, say, tennis players or anyone who's pursuing an individual sport? And obviously they can't change where they're from.
I think right now, due to the seriousness of the situation in Ukraine, it shouldn't be a case that any Russian citizens are involved in any kind of international sport or involved in media or perceived to be successful, because right now the only issue in Russia is the invasion of Ukraine, and until the invasion is ended and peace is restored, then I don't see how we can go about our daily lives supporting, reading, reviewing Russians playing sport or being involved in public life, because right now the biggest concern is Ukraine.
And plus, Sarah, we know sport is such a status symbol for Putin personally. Like, it is one of the things that he has used internationally. His own involvement in judo and, the whole Olympic thing and the international sport thing has been massive for him. I thought it was really interesting. David Walsh has a line in it, which is very interesting as well, about the 30 Russian chess grandmasters who sent a message to Putin, very specific message, and said, chess teaches responsibility for one's actions. Every step counts, and a mistake can lead to a fatal point of no return. And if this has always been about sports, now people's lives, basic rights and freedoms, human dignity and the present and future of our countries are at stake. So, and chess is very high, very, very high status in Russia as well. So interesting that people like that are coming out. But the reality is he will only probably be affected by finance, by money, and by the oligarchs whose own money has been affected, maybe turning against him. But it's
sport. Yeah. Well, sport softened his edges. That's what Putin did. He used sport to soften his edges, and I suppose it made the ordinary man the key in all of this in terms of sports reviewing and sponsorship. It made him feel more human and more normal, and now, obviously, that's why we're looking for people to be removed from sport, because you don't want people to think that the edges are being softened by watching this sport again, and that things are normal aside from this war in Ukraine.
But and Eamon Sweeney is very good as well on it, and he does make that line, and I think as Ollie Holt in the Mail on Sunday as well, he's particularly good on the soccer end of it. But Eamon Sweeney has a great line. He said, "Sport." He talks about the history of it, and he said, "Sport never did like to hurt the feelings of dictators. Maybe that'll change now."
Yeah, we'll hold our breaths. So we'll take a short break. This week's Sunday Paper Review is in partnership with Onpost as well. The Onpost Irish Women in Sports stamps are championing Ireland's sporting heroes on International Women's Day. You can get your stamps at your local post office or on post.com. We'll take a short break. Back with Sarah and Cliona in just a sec.
The Sunday Papers
on Off the Ball.
The Sunday Papers
on Off the Ball.
Now you're very welcome back. We have Sarah O'Donovan and Cliona Foley reviewing the Sunday Papers. We're going to jump to page 18 and 19 of the Sunday Times. Cliona, you picked this out. It says, no place for this. Davy Fitzgerald's latest scuffle suggests he's not learning. Cork and Camogie need better. So Mick starts off 10 minutes from the end of the Clare Cork Camogie League game a few weeks ago. Clare joint manager Conor Dolan hobbled down the steps of the stand at Cusack Park on crutches, heading for the sideline, having spent the game in his seat minding a leg injury. Then Mick outlines how there's a mix of close relationships and rivalries between the two benches. And then, having reached the sideline, Dolan found himself closer to the Cork dugout when Hickey, who was involved as well, James Hickey, part of Dave Fitzgerald's backroom team at Wexford, when Hickey began shouting at him to move back up the line, things got heated. Dolan eventually reacted, shouted something back. At that moment, Fitzgerald got involved, bumping chests with Dolan. After the linesman intervened, the two clashed again as more people were drawn to the scene. Once the mood calmed, the referee sent Dolan and Fitzgerald to the stand. And Mick says, until last week, the only existing footage in public circulation from the game was grainy video from a mobile phone that quickly went viral. Pictures shared with the Sunday Times last week show Fitzgerald moving towards Dolan, appearing to make some form of contact with Dolan's face. When speaking to local journalists after the game, Fitzgerald laughed the incident off. He said, great to get a red card in your first day back. A bit disappointed with what happened on the sideline. I don't think there was any need for it. That's the way it goes. It won't be the last bit of trouble you'll be involved in anyhow. And on it goes. Mick mentions the Camogie Association's disciplinary process went underground. No public statements over the last couple of weeks. And he said, transpose the same incident to a GAA sideline during a National League game. It's difficult to imagine the story would disappear in the same way. Under Camogie rules, to use abusive or threatening language, gestures or behaviour towards a referee, match official, any player or team official is punishable with a 2-match ban, €100 fine. In this case, both Dolan and Fitzgerald received 1-match bans. And he said, when the incident was raised again last week at a Cork Camogie sponsors launch, Fitzgerald grabbed the question before it bounced, insisting he had made peace with Dolan. He said, it was a misunderstanding, something I thought was said that was personal, but I've been assured it wasn't said, and it's over and done with, and there was nobody killed or no one hit. But when I'm involved, it's sure, look at that lunatic or whatever. That's fine. If people want to just think that I don't care anymore, I just want to be who I am passionate.
You can be
End of
passionate
quote.
and not act like a lunatic is what I would say in this instance. And this is my problem with Davy Fitzgerald constantly. And I was really surprised. First of all, I'm delighted to see Michael Foley, taking this piece on. Because there's terrible double standards in women's sport. If you want equality, then the coverage has to be the same, the analysis has to be the same, the disciplinary processes should be the same, in my opinion, as well. But he makes a very interesting point that the Camogie disciplinary process is less stringent than the men's, simply because this is such an unprecedented event. So there's that to be said, first of all. But when I watched Davy last night in analysis on RTE, and people were giving out about the new clamping down on an illegal hand passing, and his attitude always is, let the game go, what are you blowing it up for? And I'm saying, rules are rules, so you don't break rules. They're there for a reason. And I never get that. And he always says, if people think I'm a lunatic, but if you behave like a lunatic, then you're giving people fodder for that thought. When he joined the Cork Camogie, and I'd be interested in Sarah's opinion on this as a former Cork player. When he joined, there was an element of people saying, this is brilliant, he's going to bring profile. And I just thought, why would you think that about anybody getting involved with the sport? Surely what you want them to bring is expertise, coaching, analysis. Those are the things and the good things that you would hope that David Fitzgerald would bring to Cork Camogie. And unfortunately, this happened in his first game with them.
Would you not accept he could bring all those things? And when people said profile, they just meant, a floating voter might be inclined to watch how Cork Camogie are getting on.
I suppose yes, but given his, and this is what makes pieces about. he's saying nothing about his repeat offences down the years point to any sort of learning experience. The problem is that he has a tendency to get overwrought on sidelines.
Sure.
We've seen it repeatedly, and that was my fear. And then it happens at the very first match that he's involved in a National League game, and suddenly people are not talking about the play or the game, they're talking about what happened on the sideline.
Yeah, Mick quotes Fitzgerald's autobiography At All Costs, where he says, "What do I see in the mirror? Honestly, a reasonably decent man who's made many mistakes, that's who, but a man I like to think who's learnt from most of them." And so Mick's point, and Cliona read the quote from Mick's piece, is nothing about his repeat offences down the years point to any sort of learning experience. For Fitzgerald, the incident simply joined the volume of controversies now stretching back over 4 decades as a coach. Your thoughts on all this, Sarah?
Clare and Cork was never an ill-tempered affair over the last 20 years of playing camogie. If Clare were to get a win, it will be a surprise because of Cork's dominance. I think Clare won a Munster final maybe 10 years ago against Cork, against the run of play. To see the game be talked about for Davy Fitz, I don't think half the people know who won the game. And that's what's most disappointing for me, is that Cork won the game. Clare played quite well, but the commentary 2 weeks later is about Davy Fitz on the sideline. As a player on the pitch that day, Cork's first day out, in 6-7 months, looking to put last year's disappointment to bed, a new manager, a new structure, be taken seriously. And then this breaks out on the sideline. Professional players like Amy O'Connor don't deserve for the game to be turned into a mockery and a mess, and for publicity to be about the managers 2 weeks later. And that's what's really disappointing for me. And we've gotten to a stage where we're bringing it to such a professional level. For Davy to be able to turn it into, a brawl on a sideline is the reason why he might not be suitable for this Cork team or for the Camogie Association. So I don't agree that he's going to bring a profile, or a positive profile, certainly.
There is something of the dark ages about GAA sidelines still, isn't there? You compare it to any other sport, really, and how routinely it just seems to happen in GAA matches, not just with Dave Fitzgerald, but even when, like, he's a grown man and he's saying to the Cork Camogie sponsors launch about the incident. He says, "It was a misunderstanding, something I thought was said, and it was personal."
Something I thought was said. What are we in the schoolyard?
I mean, it is at that level. I thought he said something personal about me, and so I had to go at him, and
And Sarah, and his son was involved on the other side of management. Like Sarah's so right, saying this is not what we should be talking about. This is not the sort of behaviour that we see in women's Gaelic games, and it's just so central to the thing about. In fact, Mick Foley makes a very interesting point, and we're tired saying how many brilliant men are involved in women's sport and how we wouldn't be where we are without them. But he makes a very interesting point. Tracts of academic work have been devoted to the nuances that distinguish coaching techniques for women and men. While elite sports women are much the same as elite sportsmen, they're also different. The games and the mood around them are different. And Sarah's probably been saying, we've listened to people talking about even in terms of coaching, that sometimes coaches change how they do things with women, because women are much more inclined to ask why and look for the details and the explanation and understand processes, whereas men, they say, are more inclined to just do as you say and maybe not question. So there are a difference in all of those things, and yet to have people who come in and then just do something that is so ego driven, I just think, and so unnecessary, and it just frustrated me. And Sarah's so right about the level that those players are at, and the expertise and the training and everything that they're trying to put into it. And I imagine that they were pretty upset that this was what the story became.
Okay, well, Mick Foley's taken up the point very well there on pages 18 and 19 of the Sunday Times. Page 66 of the Mail, this is just an interesting one. Razzie Erasmus has done an exclusive interview with the Mail, and really it's the first time he's spoken since his ill-fated Lions tour last summer. And the headline is, "I'm not the monster who ruined rugby." So right away I think you're inclined to read on. And he's pictured here in Cape Town looking very relaxed and smiling, and it's billed as an emotional and candid interview. South Africa's Razzie Erasmus breaks his silence on the line storm that split rugby and almost cost him his career. It's Nick Simon in Cape Town in South Africa. He meets Razzie Erasmus, who has cleared his diary for the afternoon, 10 a.m. in a wine farm, and they meet at a vineyard in the hills opposite Table Mountain. He arrives in his 4x4 Toyota wearing a big grin, and Nick references even just people who happen to catch Razzie arriving, come up to him and say thank you for everything you've done for our country, and they're emotional, and it just points to what we know, which is Erasmus is very much a national treasure in South Africa. And Erasmus says, do you know my sister lives in Reading? She's a social worker for the NHS, fully invested in English life, loves the royal family and God Save the Queen, and would stand outside clapping for the old guy, Sir Tom, who walked up and down his garden 100 times during the lockdown. After what happened during the Lions tour, it felt like her family in the UK were the only people outside of South Africa who didn't hate me. How do you think that makes me feel? It feels awful, man. So just to jog your memory, Razzie Erasmus released an hour-long video which went viral after the first Lions tour, where he picked apart the performance of the referee Nick Berry, and as a result he was billed as rugby's arch villain. So his key message in this entire interview is, I did not leak the video. People think I leaked the video. I didn't. Who leaks, and this is a fair point to be fair, because it has caused him huge harm. Who leaks something like that? Why would I screw up my whole career to do that? I've got twin girls, 18 years old, who are at school, and they hear other parents telling them that their dad has effed it all up. My mum is at an old age home, and they're showing her article saying Razzie's lost it. He's got depression. He's drunk. They think those things because they are indoctrinated that I leaked that video. I want to tell the world, swearing on my youngest child's life, I did not leak that video. Many people have already made up their mind. How do you change people's perception when World Rugby have found me guilty and banned me for 12 months? I don't want people to feel sorry for me. I just want them to know what really happened. And in effect, he says the test happened. He hated the refereeing performance. He tried to reach out to Nick Berry. He didn't feel the meeting went well. He got a bit of feedback on certain decisions made in the match, but he says the feedback I received was inadequate. Only the obvious and not so critical mistakes were admitted, but the serious mistakes which affected the outcome of the match were not. So he says, we tried again, but were unsuccessful. So I decided the only way to get clarity on the decisions was to send this voiceover video that the whole rugby world has now seen. I submitted the video link to the restricted group. So the restricted group, by the way, is Joel Judge and Joe Schmidt of World Rugby and a few others. He said, I submitted the video to the restricted group using Vimeo, which is secure and safe. It was not possible for anyone to even search for the video on any search engine without the link. I've been using this platform for ages. There's never been a breach of confidentiality. If I wanted to leak the video, there were many more effective ways of doing it. So he says, I repeat, I am not the person who leaked the video. And he speaks at length, Cliona, about his daughters completely embarrassed by the whole thing. Wouldn't even come to the second test because they were, well, I think embarrassed at their own father is what he says, and he talks about being in tears himself the day of the match, the night before the match.
That's the one that really, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in this that actually interests me, and it's not Erasmus saying, you know, I didn't leak the video, but it's the relationship between, I suppose, the whole Lions tour, the relationship between coaches in rugby and referees, you know, that whole, you know, interchangeable, you know, even there's a thing in it where he says, he was trying to send messages saying, can we control the media? What's going on here? You know, rugby seems to have a very strange attitude to a lot of things that, you know, that don't happen in other sports. But I thought that it was interesting that he also said he was crying in his room before the second test. I was afraid if we had lost the second test, can you imagine that, you know, what I would have got from my own people. There's a lot in it. What isn't in it is why you would go and have a 1 hour rant about the refereeing and put it out on, wasn't it on social media at the time, I think, was it?
No, well, he's saying I didn't. I was privately sent to the refereeing fraternity.
But either way, but the content of that video was what you would really like to, like, you can make a point in 10 or 5 minutes, but I mean, anybody who saw it thought, what is the need for such, you know, a detailed, and like it's in one of the things he says in it is about he wasn't happy with how he felt that Sia Khaleesi's voice as the South African captain wasn't being respected by the referees, and he links that to the importance of having a black captain and the importance of him being treated equally, and that is an angle in it, there's some insight in that, all right, but I just thought it doesn't really centrally go to the thing, which is how long that rant went on for, why it was not more structured and clear and all the rest, and just the madness of I suppose the way the whole thing was approached. But yeah, he does say the mistake I made was not putting a password on the link, which is probably something I would definitely not do either.
Yeah. I think that kind of feedback.
This is the first two-parter as well. Sorry, just to say that.
It is.
So we don't know what more is to come.
I think that kind of feedback to referees is fairly common in rugby. And
no, it is.
This would have been a done thing.
Yeah, so. it is, but I just think there's an odd relationship. I know I've asked referees and referee about this before. Like I know it's a danger and it's a safety aspect, but like there is no. What other sports does the referee tell you? Hold on there, you're going to foul. Don't foul there now. Mind what you're doing. Like there is a very strange relationship, and then the amount of communication that goes on between them, at international level, the access that you have to referees, or the amount of, I suppose, collaboration that goes on. It interests me because it doesn't happen in other sports. And as I said, I know there's a safety reason for it, but it does seem to me to be too close. And also there does seem to be an element here of, trying to control the message getting out there, and yet who was putting the message out there?
Yeah.
The two coaches that were involved in the event.
So Sarah, any thoughts on this? Again, Razzie, I did not leak the video is the message he wants to get out here in a big way.
Okay, so my issue is that I think he's quite disconnected. He talks about when the tour was cleared to go ahead, it was beautiful, our saving grace, our economy needed it, our people needed it, South Africa was burning. And then later on he talks about having a gun to his head because they were under so much pressure to win the game. And I'm saying, why is he putting so much store in winning the game when initially he was talking about the tour bringing so much to South Africa, and he kind of lost his way, and I feel the wrong messages coming out here. Obviously, I did not leak the video or relating to the referee, but ultimately, why does he think that South Africans cared about that second win? He talks about if they lost the game, it would have meant he wasn't a national hero, and his relationship would have changed, and he put so much store in winning that one match, but ultimately South Africa hasn't been changed for the better because they won one match. So
and
I just want to clarify, by the way,
was interesting
just
too.
to clarify, by the way, he was talking metaphorically about the gun against the head, just in case anyone picked that up wrong. He wasn't taking it.
There is that interesting line there, but in relation to that, because he does say that he bluffed the Lions organisers. So he said that I'd spoken to my players, and if the midweek game is off, then the series is off. Yeah. It was a bluff. We couldn't afford to cancel the tour. Nobody could afford to cancel that tour, even though the standard of it was so bad that people said they should have. If we cancelled the tour, I was ready to say I lied about having the backing of my players, and they would have resigned. You can see. I mean, if you never saw that video, you would say yes, he's hugely emotionally invested in South African rugby, but I don't think this answers all the questions, and I'll be interested to see what the second part of it. But in terms of the emotional toll it was taking on him beforehand is very interesting, because I still I do make the presumption, I suppose, that people involved in sport at that level, can take the emotion out of it and just say this is a job, and it's difficult if your family are being barracked and harassed and all the rest. But I was very surprised to hear him saying he was crying in his room beforehand.
It almost seems he felt, well, after this video has been leaked, if we lose this second test, my career is in ruins. I'm an embarrassment. I'm going to be pilloried nationally. And it's striking as well. He is very upset at how much vitriol has come his way outside of South Africa. So he's a national treasure in South Africa, but outside of South Africa, he's seen as having damaged rugby, almost irreparably damaged the Lions tour, and kind of been painted as a monster. He's very upset at all this. Like, he's not coming to this interview saying, I don't care what anyone thinks, they're all wrong, we won the tour, ha ha ha. I think he has been clearly emotionally damaged and rattled by this whole thing, is my sense anyway. And this is like his effort to almost rehabilitate his reputation a touch by saying, look, I did the video, but I didn't put it out there to put huge pressure on the referee or to embarrass Nick Berry, which is what happened. So we'll see what's in part two. I don't really know what's needed in part two, actually, so maybe it goes into more.
Can I suggest
territory.
Can I suggest there's quite a lot of similarities right now to Davy Fitz, the love and the hate aspect here, in Irish sport and South African sport. Two people who are very clearly emotional and raw and passionate, and they just don't seem to be hitting the right note enough.
Yeah, no, there definitely has to be a sea change where you can't just say, look, I'm passionate, therefore all is forgiven all the time, The odd time, I guess, it's fair enough, but it just can't be a default. Well, it was passion. What can I do?
And while and in his case, he didn't break the rule. He's entitled to make these videos and send his impression to the referees, and that's all allowable.
Yeah.
I was just at the time really surprised at the content of the video and the
intensity.
The intensity is the word.
Wow.
Exactly.
We'll take a short break. We're going to go through the final couple of stories in just a moment.
The Sunday Papers.
On Off the Ball.
Now, you're very welcome back. So let's check in on the hurling before we go through the papers again with Sarah and Cliona. We're going to start with the game down in Ennis. This is Clare against Limerick, Division 1 Group A of the hurling. Throw-in was 1:45. So I presume Ashton O'Reilly were moving towards full time.
Yes, it's 21 minutes gone in the second half, Joe. It's 17 points to Clare, 15 points to Limerick. Very little between the sides here in Cusack Park. It was Limerick who led by 2 points at half time. David Fitzgerald had his goal disallowed for Clare for square ball. Declan Hannon was replaced by Ronan Connolly due to what looked like an ankle injury, and we saw Aaron Gallan scored 6 points in that first half. But straight from the throw-in in the second half, Dermot Burns pointed for Limerick, putting them 3 points ahead. Robin Mounsey missed a great goal opportunity for Clare when they really needed it. Just crept wide of the post. Tony Kelly really on form here for Clare. They're trying to get him on the ball at every chance. And who else but Kelly pointed to level the game. And Dave Fitzgerald quickly followed up for Clare. But Limerick's Dermot Burns, he's been brilliant all day. He levelled it once again to make it 15 points apiece. You could feel the tension, Joe. It's very much a physical game with both teams giving as good as each other. At the moment, it's 23 minutes gone. It's Clare 17 points, Limerick 16 points.
Okay, very interesting. So Limerick 2 points down with about 15 minutes to go, and it would be a fourth consecutive loss for them if Clare were to see that out down in Ennis. By the way, in the football, so a couple of rescheduled football matches today. One of the more bizarre scorelines at Wexford Park. So we're talking here Division 4, round 3. This threw in at 2 o'clock, so second half just underway. Wexford 11 points. Tipperary have 1 point, but they also have 4 goals. So Wexford 11 points, Tipperary 4-1. Which means Tipperary are winning by 2 points in that game. So there you are. And why go for points when you can score 4 goals is very much the Tipperary policy. And then the other game in Division 4, Sligo leading Cavan by 3, 7 points to 4 in that game. And in Division 2, Galway, Porg Joyce and Galway against Offaly and John Maughan. So it's Galway 110, Offaly 1-7. So Galway leading by 3 points, and we're just into the second half in that game. We'll keep you updated across the afternoon. We are reviewing the Sunday papers here on Off the Ball. It's in partnership with Onpost this weekend. The Onpost Irish Women in Sports stamps are championing Ireland's sporting heroes on International Women's Day. You can get your stamps at your local post office or onpost.com. Very happy to say we have Cliona Foley here in studio and Sarah O'Donovan, All-Ireland winning camogie player as well. Two pieces which are linked, I suppose. Michael Dignan on page 63 of the Mail on Sunday, who is writing about integration of ladies GAA and camogie and the GAA. And we have Helen O'Rourke profiled on page 10 of the Sunday Independent, who has been the CEO of the LGFA for 25 years, which is an extraordinary run. So, Cliona, you might get the ball rolling here. There's been a lot of talk of integration of the GAA and the LGFA and the Camogie Association of late in particular. Michael Dignan is almost giving his lived experience of doing that in Offaly, and I mean he's very enthused about it, and you know, holds his hands up and says, geez, back 20-30 years ago this stuff was completely over my head, and now he's seen the benefits of it at community level in a big way. Yeah,
a really good piece actually, and like as the chairperson of Offaly GA as well, his insights I think are really, really valuable. We were talking about this, I remember I think about a month ago I was here and I was saying integration, like how the integration happens, when it happens, it's not going to be an overnight process. Like we've just seen golf integrate in Ireland, and it took them 4 years, didn't it? 2 years of talking, collaborating with clubs and getting the sounding voices, and then actually putting together a structure, and then looking at it, pulling it apart, putting it back together, creating a whole new body for golf in Ireland. And historically the Women's Association was way older than the men's, of course. So it's not going to be a simple process. What we have now though is we have people coming out and saying, important people who are involved in the sport, saying we want it. The ladies football Congress on Friday voted for it as well, voted to certainly to keep the momentum going and to discuss it more realistically now. But it will come down, as all these things do, to money and facilities. money and land. Doesn't everything in Ireland come down to money and land? But it really will. And Michael is really good here, because he goes through the details of talking to people involved in Offaly County Board. Their coaching officer is a woman, Karina Haverty, talking to her, taking soundings, understanding it, seeing how they could change things at a county board level. And one of the really important things, and Sarah knows this more than anyone, sponsorship, trying to get the same sponsor for men's and women's teams in a county. And Offaly have got Glenisk, and they're talking to Camogie and ladies football in Offaly about making sure the sponsors them all. And I think that's really important, because sponsors, we know now, have a huge influence on sporting strategy, I think, long term. But he looks at it and he says, when you look at mileage rates, physio, taking care of players, then you look at gates, what's been brought in, how do you fund it equally, and then the practical element, what about pitches, how do we create more space for male and female players to get space to play games. So this is at the heart of the whole thing, and I think he does a really good job on discussing the nitty gritty of it, if you like.
I agree, because it's easy not to discuss the nitty gritty. It's easy to say, well, pitches for all, equality for all, and everyone says, well, how could you disagree with that? Of course, let's go. And he starts off by painting the great picture of boys and girls getting out of the car together for matches, parents supporting on both fronts, the barbecues, the things organised around the games. That is real integration, and he loves the GAA playing that role. And he talks about his own town, which doesn't necessarily have loads going on outside of the GAA, and so it's so important. But on the nitty gritty point, like as you said, mileage, physio, and all the supports that male inter-counties teams are being funded, if you're going to equal that for Camogie and ladies football, the bill is 3 times that, and it's already massive. So where will we get the money? And he's saying this, I suspect, as a county board chairman. Consider the gate at a county final. If 5,000 supporters pay in for the men's final and there's 500 at the ladies final, do we combine the monies and split gates equally? How does an equal funding model work in practice across the 3 codes? And then there's the practical element. We won't have any more pitches, we won't have any more lights, we won't have any more money. So there are going to be obvious practical sticking points. And he also talks as well about the makeup of committees. The GPA motion is looking for 50-50 representation on committees. To me, that's a bias. It's who's best for the job. I would take 100% ladies for a committee if that's the best fit. If 5 have to be men and 5 have to be women, is that really integration? ? And he raises these questions.
So they four women on the management committee in Offaly, which is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's good to raise these points and for him to express them publicly and in a very honest and I think genuine, sincere way. Sarah, what did you take from all that?
So the nitty gritty part is very interesting to me. I'm currently coaching 2 teams. I train one of the teams on a Tuesday evening on a tennis court. They're an incredibly talented group of ladies, but I haven't seen goalposts yet. So we play on a pitch with goalposts, and I am training them on a tennis court. That's a Tuesday evening. Thursday evenings, we train the girls at 9 o'clock until 10:10. And some of the players who are mums can't come to training because their kids are up at 4 a.m. So they have to be in bed for 8:30, 9 o'clock, and the timing just isn't working. And what I would say to the integration piece is we're going to have to look at the whole model, and it might be that the calendars might be separate. We would all have access to the pitches. We would all have access to the facilities. It just mightn't be able to happen at the same time. So, we are going to have to do lots of outside the box thinking. I was reading, obviously, Helen O'Rourke and, speaking about autonomy. And her big concern is that, that they want to retain their autonomy. But I don't know how much autonomy the Ladies Football Association had last year when, obviously, they ended up in Croke Park with the Cork and Galway fiasco. And, they were asking the men's side of the association to let them into Croke Park at a very fundamental point in their season. And it was quite embarrassing at that point. So, I think she has to look at autonomy, but also integration. And she can't just, be so dismissive of the practicalities of running an organisation when you don't own your own facilities.
Yeah, it's a key thing. I was looking at there was a lot in the papers this weekend because International Women's Day is coming up on Tuesday, and there was loads about feminism, what feminism means, and I read something really interesting. It really struck a chord with me, which was about feminism is about money. It's about having independent wealth so that you can do what you want to be able to do, and it is a problem for female team sports in that they don't have that traditionally because they haven't had the audiences and the TV money and all the rest. So it leaves them impoverished on that side. And because of that, you're absolutely right. You spot on there. You don't have that autonomy because you're always beholden to somebody else to get facilities. So it is absolutely central to it. It's a good piece. Nadine Doherty has a piece on, the headline is Iron Lady Forged a New Era, and like it does look at how much has and Helen O'Rourke, who's been in the role for 25 years, has done for ladies Gaelic football. But she makes some really interesting observations at the end of it, I think. And also, Helen O'Rourke doesn't really do one-on-ones. She hasn't done them for a very long time. And it's the 50th anniversary next year. So I think it would be interesting, and I hope she would. Nadine makes the point, and she would be very close to players still. Her point is that she feels that because Helen O'Rourke herself personally didn't come out and speak after that awful incident last year with that late switch of a venue for All Ireland semi-finals and how the women were treated in it, she said that she feels that she has perhaps lost the trust of the players who kind of expected her to be the one to come out and explain that. And she says, I just think this is interesting what she says, over the years in her own club, it didn't occur to us to complain because conditions continued to improve, albeit from a low baseline. Behind the scenes, our battles are being fought by O'Rourke and her team, and for that I will be eternally grateful. But there is perhaps a cohort of current players who have a limited insight into the work the LGFA has done over the last 25 years. That's no fault of their own, but there is possibly a further disconnect between the current players and the administration. I often Sarah's probably saying, you talk to some current players and you say, God, the amount of progress is amazing, but they don't see that because they're here now. They're here and now. They train their butts off. They're looking for equality. They can't understand why there isn't money for things that they know inter-county players need to play at that level. Yeah. And amazing to see yesterday that crowd for that league game. And I think that's one of the ways forward. To see that crowd for that league game between Dublin and Meath in Navan yesterday was just fantastic. Also to know, and it's an interesting one Sarah's saying about how do we manage this duality? Michael Dignan said it there, who gets the gate, or how is the gate split? And I used to always think that that's going to be a problem. But haven't Leinster Council this year said they're going to play the ladies football final and the men's football final together on the same day? So there's obviously an agreement there about how that gate is going to be split, or they're coming to some compromise. So I think these little shifts are happening, and I think there's been great momentum in the last few weeks that really will push it on. But it is an interesting thing about how much has been done so far, her place in that, and where it goes from here, and this inference that the LGFA were the ones who are holding back progress. Why is that? She has said it before, Helen O'Rourke, that I think that this thing about wanting to keep autonomy and wondering, I often hear people saying, oh, people are going to lose jobs. The LGFA has, I think, only 14 official staff. It's not like, it's not this a huge organisation that people, I think all that's all nonsense, I think. I think it is about how, the compromises are made and how there is agreement and how people on both sides will give and take.
To her credit, it says in the piece Nadine Doherty's written that the position of the LGFA now, the financial position, is very strong. At 31, Helen O'Rourke was perceived by many to be too young and too inexperienced, and here she is 25 years later, and so much has happened. On the Galway Cork debacle last year, where the Parnell pitch was frozen and then they moved to Croke Park, and effectively there was no warm-up time, and they were being told with 5-6 minutes on the pitch, come on, get a move on, let's go. I did feel at the time, and I said at the time, I thought the LGFA, that day were far too meek about the whole thing. Yeah. And it's interesting that Nadine Doherty has said in her piece that the most significant collateral damage from that day was a distrust manifested between the players and the LGFA. Footballers across the country felt abandoned as the LGFA publicly thanked the GAA for their ongoing support, use of facilities, especially at short notice, while all but saying that both teams should have been just thankful to have played in Croke Park regardless of circumstances. O'Rourke's own silence, failing to appear because it was the president of the LGFA, who I think was interviewed the next morning Ireland, and that did not improve the situation. It was her own silence, failing to appear or comment in the media, was seen as a letdown by the players. And I thought, if she was interviewed, she should have been asked, why didn't she get on the phone to Croke Park and say, this is an All-Ireland semi-final. Are you seriously telling me you're not going to push back the men's match by 15 or 20 minutes, which you do all the time for traffic, to give our players adequate warm-up space? And I think as well there was an issue with the cameras couldn't be moved from Parnell Park to Croke Park. But again, to get onto RTE and to say to Declan McBennett, who's been very supportive of women's sport, are you not going to give us a lend of your cameras and your crew who could be on site to provide service for this match? Are you all not going to do this? Do I have to publicly shame you?
Yeah.
And I mean, there
was a beholdenness there. There was that gratitude of nodding the cap, and people outside of it are so frustrated by that, and players are so frustrated by that. But Sarah's absolutely right. It's the reality. Listen to what she's telling us about having to coach teams on it.
But I would have thought in that instance. I mean, you think back to the GPA in its founding years. You have to upset a few people. You have to. If Helen O'Rourke had to publicly say, RTE wouldn't give us their cameras, Croke Park wouldn't move the game by a measly 50 minutes, this is the way we're treating women, and almost go to war a little bit, that might have been, in my opinion, preferable at the time to, thank you. We don't need to warm up, we'll just get on with it, it's only an All-Ireland semi-final. I thought the GPA maybe there, or the LGFA, excuse me, I've golf in the mind. The LGFA should have done a bit more that day, but it is interesting to see that day has had repercussions maybe for the relationship with the organisation and the players.
Yeah, or just that trust that's there, as you say. Yeah, and I remember thinking at the time as well, if this was the GAA, would the CEO of the GAA be coming out to speak about this, or the president? And why is it not the CEO? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because she has to have been centrally involved. It's ongoing, and it's really again good to see so much coverage of this. Mark Gallagher has a piece today in the Mail on Sunday. There's some coverage as well, some follow-up coverage of the women's rugby as well. So it's the first time in Sunday papers. I don't know how you feel, but for a long time there's actually a lot about women's sport in the Sunday papers today.
Huge
which shows, I suppose, the place that it's becoming to have in society.
Sarah, was there any last point you wanted to make in all that before we move maybe on to the rugby report?
Sure, I suppose just from the financial point of view that was being made in Nadine Doherty's article about how well placed the Ladies Football Association are now in terms of their financial position, and that they could actually stand apart. I felt that, speaking to your point about the choices they could have made in terms of speaking up against RTE and speaking up against the situation they had, the All-Ireland semi-final, those sponsors, have put Ladies Football Association in a very powerful position, and that should mean that they have a voice, and they shouldn't be able to use their voice. If you look at the Irish women's soccer team and the position they put themselves in, they went to war, and now I would say they're in a much better position, and they have a brilliant sponsor in Sky. So it's naivety on the part of Helen O'Rourke, unfortunately, at that point.
Because she would, they would have had 99% public support as well. Can't push the men's game back 15 minutes will transform the experience of our players. Who's against that?
Yeah. I remember thinking at the time, nobody. Who would have objected? Or who could have objected?
People at Croke Park getting an extra game to watch for free. But it was very meek, and it made me wonder if maybe you need to be a bit more aggressive, especially now at the point of integration. It can't be a case of going, well, at least she's saying we need autonomy and we're not just going to go in there and be
I also think that where she's come from, remember 1973 ladies football started, and that was just on a competitive level, and the organisation as a professional organisation, if you like, is so much more recent, 25 years really since she took over. That where she's come from, she has done things maybe a lot of the time by stealth or collaboration or cooperation, and that's been the most successful way.
Yes, fair.
But absolutely right when Sarah says, given everything we've seen in the last few years and the numbers of people at that match yesterday, the interest, the quality in that match yesterday in Navan between Dublin and Meath, just such a brilliant thriller. Maybe now the LGFA should realise that they have more power and they should be using it, as you're suggesting.
So page 71 of the Mail on Sunday, none the wiser is the headline. It's Rory Keane's piece here. No clear answer on World Cup debacle while mystery grows over withheld details. This is well, the first of two IRFU Commission reports into the women's game here. And Rory Keane opens by saying, at the end of Friday's hour-and-a-half-long media briefing into Ireland's failure to qualify for the World Cup, there was one glaring question unanswered. Why did Ireland fail to qualify for the World Cup? And he says IRFU CEO Kevin Potts was front and centre Friday, flanked on the video call by Amanda Bennett, who conducted the report, and Fiona Steed, who's the former Irish international, now sitting on the RFU committee. 30 recommendations in total, an additional €1 million in funding per year. There's a new role created, head of women's performance and pathways, to oversee the women's game here. Rory makes the point that, you know, one of the recommendations, for instance, is the national team needed a full-time analyst, nutritionist, better support with regards to kit equipment and accommodation. He says that tells you everything about the state of the women's game. And there was no mention of Anthony Eddy leaving his post the night before. Potts denied the two events were linked.
Yeah, there was, the question was made. I was on the media. There was he was asked, was it connected, and he said absolutely not.
Yeah. Although Rory says what we're all thinking, that it's not a major leap to deduce that both events were likely to be inextricably linked. But anyway, they're saying that they're not. And I guess the overall sense is there's just very little information in the report. I think they've declined the opportunity to publish it because a number of people spoke on the condition of anonymity. I'm sure that point was made, Cliona.
Well, I asked that question because I asked that question of the woman who was in charge of what was an independent report, an independent company making an independent report. I said to her, look, we've had loads of post-Olympic reports in this country, lots of them, and you can just players can be quoted, or anybody can be quoted anonymously. Why did that not happen in this case? Why did you not publish it? Because remember, this was at the heart of the players' complaints, was that they knew this review was happening. This review was commissioned before that players' letter in December. Was commissioned in November, but the players were afraid that it was going to fudge things and not be transparent, you know. And in the end, it isn't transparent because I was made the analogy that the scrum went down, but we still don't know who took it down.
No.
But in the report, or in the recommendations, what we didn't find out was who brought the scrum down. What we were told is it's been reset. We've improved all these things. There's 30 recommendations. We're working on them. Off we go. And it was said that players were happy that this was the way to go. But it is interesting because it's the key question: why did Ireland fail to qualify for the World Cup? You presume there were faults at every level, including, you know, the players on the field.
Oh, big time the players.
You know,
Rory,
absolutely big time.
Rory makes that point actually, and I wonder if this is true. He says, ironically, there was little clarity on what happened in Parma in September.
Yeah.
Eddie wasn't mentioned, nor was Adam Griggs, the coach at the time, or his coaching team, or any of the players for that matter. He says in his piece here, Rory, there were obviously some uncomfortable truths in this report for the RFU, and it's quite possible certain players may not have emerged covered in glory either. Consequently, it would seem all parties concerned are happy to move on from what transpired during that ill-fated month in Parma. Yeah,
and it's part of the response to that question was that they didn't publish the report on the recommendations or discussions with the independent company who made it and their legal team.
Right.
So that's where we are.
There's real... Look, we are where we are, everyone. Let's not go raking
somebody
back
actually
over the
used
past.
that phrase, we are where we are.
Yeah, we don't need to get into it. Look, we didn't make the World Cup. We did our best. We'll move on.
What he does make a point, though, was that sneering, hostile response to the players' letter was replaced with a more conciliatory, magnanimous message of peace and progress. And, I mean, Kevin Potts actually apologising to players. He was asked at one point, what exactly are you apologising for? Yeah. But that certainly is unprecedented, I think.
Yeah.
I'd like to understand, was it off field or on field the players let the side down? Because if you're coming back into, you know, a new season and a new structure, you'd hate to feel like the blame was laid at your feet and you didn't necessarily know what you did. Now, maybe it's very clear within the player group, but, you know, reading from this article, I was a bit unsure as to whether the players were being blamed for their on or off field behaviour. And I would like that to be cleared up if I was a player going back into that squad.
What surprised me, I suppose, was that just that so many jobs, what wasn't clearly delineated yet, and still hasn't been, even in this review, is where do 7s and 15s work together, and how, where's the priority, where's it going to be going forward. That's now to be decided by the new head of women's high performance, which is a new role that's going to be appointed. But I did think that still hasn't been answered. But also it was quite, there's 30 recommendations, they've agreed to move on them, they've moved on about half of them or more than half of them already. But it is shocking to hear that a lot of the roles that you would expect to be full-time, like sports psych, strength and conditioning, nutritionist, all those things were all part-time roles. That is, so that shows you how much has to be done. I don't know we don't know who involved with any of this review put their hands up and said, I was at fault or I did something wrong, because we don't know. We were never told any of that. All we were told were, this is the recommendations and everybody's happy and we're going to move on with it.
Yeah. Shane McGrath, his piece, I think makes a really good point, which is, okay, the extra $1 million has now been invested, so suddenly we're up to $4 million, and that's not nothing at all. He was saying, I don't want to paraphrase him too much, but effectively saying, let's not necessarily just throw that money at full-time or part-time contracts. What rugby in the women's game needs to focus on is grassroots in a big way, because he says in 2018 the number of adult players is 1,341. Now they're trying to get to 5,000 by 2023, but he says given how well that plan's going, it's safe to assume that target won't be met. And he said Ireland is trying to compete at test level with a pool of players that may still not extend to 2,000, and really that's the area they need to sort out. The plan is to have youth player numbers at 6,500. In 2018 it was 2,500. So it's hard to overstate, Sarah, how small that base is. If Ireland are going to be competitive, it can't be a case that you're at fewer than 2,000 senior players to pick from.
I agree 100%, and I suppose to attract players in, you have to know that the environment is something that they want to become a part of.
Yeah.
And from a player point of view, that was my concern a while ago. It's like, is this a difficult bunch of players? Is this a notoriously difficult group to get involved with? Am I better off staying in my own lane? They won't attract new players in unless the environment is there, and so it's chicken and egg.
Yeah.
It's all chicken and egg.
No,
isn't
it is.
Yeah, it's funny.
Certainly something in Parma went wrong. Like, those players should have been good enough to beat what was in front of them, whatever about the wider issues in Irish rugby. Something went badly awry.
Something went badly awry, and was it in their preparation? Was it on the day? Was it on the coaching on the day? We know players make mistakes on the pitch, but that happens, all the time. Players make mistakes all the time, just like referees make mistakes all the time. And I think as well, there were some positive things that happened recently that I think, like Shane is saying, where do you spend the money? How do you spend it? Where does it go into grassroots? Like in the last week or two, Munster have announced that they're starting a schoolgirls junior and senior cup competition, first time ever. 4 teams only starting in the senior, but that's a start, right? That integrates them, and that integrates schools and clubs, and then into their local, underage teams. It was a really good question asked as well at the thing that wasn't answered, but I was surprised. They asked was, should you pursue the model of provincial with the women's game when it's not professional, so it's not needed, and maybe you'd be better off doing it in a different way, or maybe only provincial underage? And actually Fiona Steed, who's now on the RFU executive, or the main board, she balked at that and said, oh God, no, you never take away the provincial thing. But it was a really good question, and it made me think about it as well, because I know that also this week, the other good thing I saw happening recently was that they've made new underage development. They've kind of created a new underage development squad that will feed into the Irish team as opposed to provincial teams, because they're there already. So there's lots of new stuff happening as well that may be far more relevant in the long run in creating new players, as Sarah's saying, than this report.
Yes.
But this report is definitely going to make changes. It appears to be ready to make changes for what's happening with the national senior team, and also there is definitely a change of tone, and that was, I think, really important.
Just before we go, 2 last quick pieces. So you both picked out, or certainly Sarah you did, and Cliona you got a chance to read it as well. I didn't quite get a chance to read it, but this was a profile of Desi Farrell in the Sunday Business Post. What jumped out here, Sarah?
Well, a couple of things, I suppose. In detail, Barry White goes through the kind of demise of Dublin football over the last 5-6 months, and the stark fall from grace. And I suppose when he's talking about Desi Farrell specifically, he talks about somebody who came into the role who was looked at as the ideal candidate for the role because of his accolades and previous accolades. And then it goes on to say, in light of the success of Dublin teams thereafter, maybe he wasn't the right man for the job because he hadn't won enough or in the same way as the current crop. And to my, I suppose, a couple of interesting points, Kevin Cassidy was kind of coming out in his defence saying this group of players was a once-in-a-generation group of players and anyone was going to struggle. I think that if Dublin get relegated, it's actually going to make the competition poorer. And you know, I think Dublin's woes are actually going to be negative for Dublin football. And I think that's what kind of came out of it for me.
One of the things I thought was of course he does make the points as well about all the players who are injured currently and are due to come back into the team and how it could be a very different team by the time the summer rocks around. But also Bernard Brogan is quoted. Now there's an anonymous Dublin player quoted, I think, or an ex-Dublin player. I think that's funny. I just think it's funny the notion that somebody, what does he say, a well-known Dublin GA figure who didn't want to be named in this piece. And you think,
like an IRFU Ruby report here.
That's a bit strange, but anyway, but Bernard Brogan comes out in this and quite strongly says that Desi was the right man for the job.
Right.
And given his history and his coaching of so many of these young players when they were minors and under 21 players, the question does remain, and it is raised by, that's the central thesis here, is really is who else would have done it, or who else might have done a better job, or who else was in a better position to take it on. But I think it's interesting that Brogan says, I'm not defending him out of some sense that Dubs should speak well of Dubs. I genuinely believe he's the right man to merge the new players and the old players and bring them through this transition. So that's a vote of confidence from a very respected figure within Dublin.
What does the anonymous Dub say? Speak a touch
the anonymous Dub, actually, what the anonymous Dub says, which made me laugh so much, is they could have beaten Mayo the last day. They missed 3 gilt-edged goal chances and they let in a goal they wouldn't normally have done.
What you need to be anonymous about for that?
But never mind that they're anonymous, but also
if you're not going to say something juicy, don't go anonymous.
But also the fact that they wouldn't normally let a goal in that they wouldn't normally have done. I mean, sorry, what's the new normal here? The new normal is changing all the time.
Oh God, I thought it was going to be something good.
He was saying they've had a lot of luck before and they're not having any luck at the moment, Joe, the poor devils.
Okay, but don't quote me on that.
But don't quote me on that.
But you will agree though, obviously, that if Dublin are relegated, you know, the energy goes out of the capital very quick. So while we can look on and say, God, you know, they're playing brutally, they have to be in the championship for it to be effective. Just with the sheer number of people in Dublin who support it, the ordinary ban, you know, it makes for a great summer in Dublin.
And the money as well is a big one. There was a nice piece on just Shane Warne, just because I know there'd probably lots of people, cricket fans and Shane Warne fans listening. There's some lovely pieces on Shane Warne throughout the papers, and I thought there was a very good one in the Sunday Indo. I think it's from Simon. I think it might be from Simon Briggs in the Telegraph, but it's really good. Yeah.
Capture. I was talking about him almost as this great character at the perfect point of professionalism, but not quite full on professionalism. And actually, if you come along 10 or 15 years earlier, or even
I tell you, this load into county managers would have had him off the panel very quickly for his off the field behaviour. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. To mention as well, Paul Kimmage is writing again in the Sunday Independent, and he's responding to the criticism of his 2-part piece over the previous 2 weeks. Now, Sarah, I know you haven't had a chance to read those pieces, and Cliona, I know you didn't see part 2, so it's kind of probably not best advised to get too into this under those circumstances. But he's saying Shooting the Messenger, a classic race scene, certainty. So he's doubling down, and he's saying we've been here before with a Murta and a regulator that can't be trusted. He's doubling down in the links and the commonalities between cycling and horse racing. So, for instance, Kevin Blake was one of those who criticised the pieces not delving too much into Pike Bridge. And again, if you're just coming to this fresh, it would take a long explanation here. Pike Bridge of Stephen Mahon, who it was pointed out by several people that, and indeed myself in part 1, that it wasn't referenced when it was in the context of, I suppose, a sense that the IHRB had gone after Stephen Mann for welfare issues after he turned whistleblower, and so to not mention Pike Bridge seemed like an omission. But Paul Kimmage addresses all the Pike Bridge scandal or points here, and is arguing that actually the Pike Bridge case was more complicated than it might seem at first glance, and goes through it in a lot of detail. Like it's difficult to tease it all out here. So the best thing, I suppose, if you're following this case, is just to read it. But certainly, when he deals with the Pike Bridge situation, he says that for 3 months now we've been doing our duty. It's hard not to conclude that racing has a cycling problem. A regulator who Paul Kimmage says can't be trusted, an unquestioning press, a contract of omerta between enforcers and enablers. He says the sport has one chance, and he references how last week Paul Gavin of Sinn Féin called for an inquiry into the IHRB. Gavin demanding a full independent inquiry into all affairs, activities, practices, appointments within the IHRB. There's certainly been a lot of rumour and innuendo and speculation prior to these Sunday Independent articles being published about the possible use of illegal performance-enhancing drugs. I mean, again, it's impossible to sum it up neatly, because we're talking about a massive, across 2 weeks piece. And so, but in effect, Stephen Mahon is alleging drug use in the sport. He talks of conversations with somebody in the yard of Trainer X as it was billed, and goes through the various substances given to horses, and Trainer X can't be mentioned. And Stephen Mahon's currently serving a 4-year reduced to 3.5-year ban for welfare issues over his horses. And there's links drawn as to, well, the timing of this ban hitting him around the time he's turned whistleblower. And then, of course, look, there's the Pike Bridge welfare issue from years ago, which Paul Kimmage tries to go into and give a different side to in this piece. Where that leaves the sport, I don't know. You know what I would say, actually, though, for all this talk of welfare over the last 2 weeks, is if there is an investigation into the IHRB, no, like the welfare of these animals is just talked about with such, as if it's of lesser importance than doping. Like for me, as someone looking on to the sport, animal welfare issues every bit as important as doping, and doping really is an animal welfare issue. So getting to the bottom of what has or hasn't happened with Stephen Mahon and any other yard when it comes to welfare is every bit as important for me as doping, I would say. And that's the thing, reading it, there's doping in every sport. We know it's happening. The welfare of these animals is every bit as important, and it's not given the same prominence. I'd like to see, we could see an investigation into that just as quickly, to be honest. Cliona, I know you didn't read part 2, and Sarah, I know you haven't read the pieces, so there's a degree of me just waffling on here. But that jumped out to me, so what happened with Pike Bridge is a question I now have. Let's get in there. Let's find out exactly what happened, and let's get in, and let's get to the bottom of this 4-year ban.
But the 4-year ban was subsequent to Pike.
No, it was. I know.
Yeah, that's very important to understand.
But again,
I think the problem here
the point is being made, though, in this piece, or in these pieces, that there's an implication that as soon as Stephen Mahon turned whistleblower, that then he gets hit with this 4-year ban. And so that's more than a coincidence almost. And what's happened, like behind the scenes, and actually. So let's get in and figure this out, because welfare is just as serious an issue, if not more serious, than doping. I don't think Pike Bridge cares if it won the Grand National. A horse cares about how it's been treated and looked after. So look, if something. It's difficult because there's legal issues. But
I think this piece, this piece again is Paul Kimmage responding to some criticisms again of his coverage from within the racing industry. So that's where this piece is coming from again. And he's saying, we've been here before with omerta and a regulator that can't be trusted. That's his allegation, not mine. All I'd say is that he is working off the evidence of one whistleblower. And I think when these cases come to light and you're trying to break down a structure and try to get to the truth of things, it helps to have more than one source. We were always trained as journalists to have 3, minimum of 3 sources on big news stories or breaking stories. So I think that is why this will to and fro until there is hard evidence produced, or somebody else collaborates this evidence, or what one person is saying.
But I don't think anybody would be shocked to know that there is an issue with drugs in the sport. It's always had a reputation. And sure, this is a sport where even losing is a way to make money, and that happens deliberately. So nobody's shocked. And I would say as well, when Jim Bulger spoke up, he was absolutely listened to.
Yeah, because he holds such reverence within the sport.
Correct.
Yeah,
so it is wrong.
Of his longevity.
It is wrong to say that he was shot down or he was ignored. He absolutely wasn't, to the point where this went before Oireachtas committees and was discussed there. So Jim Bulger was not shot down, and that point should be made as well.
I think this is going to run and run, but I think more needs to. I suppose I think again it's about hard facts and other evidence. I think that is going to be important if something is to change, and if the alleged corruption in the system is to be exposed.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, any allegations will be listened to here and at the full. Like any investigation into this sport has full backing here, because of course nobody wants drugs in sport. But
that piece that I was talking about actually is in the Sunday Independent, the one about Shane Warne.
Yeah. But
the sub-headline on it is Shane Warne never forgot that sport was fun, and it is a great piece on that. But the reality is that commercial sport, particularly sport where money and power and all these kind of things involved, is not fun, and we've seen so much of that, and that's probably what most of the coverage today is about.
No, it's been incredibly grim, actually, every topic we've talked about. But I just want to make the point again. Drugs for sure, but let's do deep dives on animal welfare and make sure everything is kosher there, because certainly the text messages I read in part 2 between an employee of Mahon and Lynn Hillier were not good. And that shouldn't be overlooked either. And if racing is to survive, there's the issue of doping, sure, but also, are we doing right by these animals? Should be to the forefront of the conversation.
And of course, that was the big ethical question raised in the Gordon Elliott case. Wasn't it? It was about respect for animals, how animals are treated even when they're dead. Where do we go from there? And by coincidence, there are a couple of pieces on Gordon Elliott in today's papers about the string that he's bringing to Cheltenham, and where his place is in the sport back again. Yeah,
that was discussed as well. Look, I think it's something we'll come back to. I invited Paul in to discuss the issue at large a number of months ago. You're more than welcome to come in any time and maybe treat it better than give it a better treatment maybe than we've managed here, because again, when it's part 1 and part 2 and another piece today, and I'm sure lots of you haven't heard the podcast that Paul's talking about, it's like it's impossible to bring everyone up to speed in the space of 5 minutes. We'll have to leave it there. Cliona Foley, thanks so much for coming into the studio, and Sarah O'Donovan, thanks so much for coming on as well. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
We'll take a short break.